When I proposed this talk, I made a typo when I submitted it, and it was as if my hand was guided. We are talking about football at the moment, the hand of God, But it was as if my hand was guided and I missed out the X, and it kind of informed really what I want to say, what comes next, but what comes next, as you might see later. As Laszlo, I think, was the last speaker, and he talked about the meaning of life. And you might see, in fact, I'll take this to the extreme, because if you remember the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, meaning of life, the number 42, I think, was calculated by the planet Earth and all the mice and the people. The planet Earth was a whole compute engine, and so maybe that's what I'm going to refer to a bit later. So there's a little bit of a history lesson. Quick, that's me a long time ago with long hair, way back when I used to do terminals and mainframes. That really is me, actually. But my interaction with the cloud, I had no idea what was in the cloud, but my interaction was with what I came to know as the lightning bolts, which connected to it, because there was quite a few times I would come in and find the equipment that connected to the cloud had been blown out by some lightning storms. So, yeah, I understand now why they use that lightning bolt to connect to the cloud. If I come forward, that really is me again, just a few months ago, having a kind of midlife crisis with my hair. And if I look at the cloud now with my cloud glasses, my contemporary cloud glasses, well, I see companies like this. There is a reason I chose Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, and Facebook. You'll see later. But other cloud providers are available. But you'll come to hopefully realize why I mention these. One reason is this model of the cloud has got very long roots. In fact, it goes back a long way, and as Meatloaf might say, objects in the rear-view mirror look a lot closer than they are. I don't know if you know that song, but, mainframes. And in fact, in 1943, Watson did predict that there may be 5 computers. He didn't know, in fact, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook, Apple, none of those existed in 1943, of course, but there are 5. Herb Grosch, 1950s, he anticipate there will be 15 big data centers even, In the 60s, there's not a lot more of this, don't worry, but I think it's quite relevant. In the 60s, of course, John McCarthy, got the idea, time slicing, time sharing on computers. A computer can do more than one thing at the same time. And the idea of utility computing started to come into sort of circulation. And Licklider in 63 took it to a new level by networking time-sharing machines. So you could put a problem into the network and a collection of machines could solve it. And I suppose it came to fruition in this kind of seminal book by Parkhill, The Challenge of the Utility Computer, 1966. It's got all the elements of modern-day cloud computing in it. Elastic computing, consume as much as you want, charge for what you use, multiple tenants, the public cloud, and you've got different range of services from compute to application. Doesn't mention storage there. That wasn't really something you had much back then. You had tapes and you had very small storage. And of course, back in 2008, still history, there's a lot of history, but more contemporary history in this. Nick Carr reused Parkhill's ideas and made a big deal of it in The Big Switch. 2008 really was a kind of big explosion of cloud computing. And he made a big deal about how computing is like utility. And he made a big deal about electric industry, that we don't all have generators, I think backup generators on site. We generally plug into a grid and get our utilities from some sort of grid, water, gas, electric. We don't produce them ourselves. So just to make the point, there's a photo of the steam rising out of Google's Oregon data center. It's big power is in there. And this is quite convenient, quite important, because no matter how small you are, you can command great power. From your little handheld, you've got massive data storage. It's almost like releasing a genie out of the bottle. IBM, wants to put the power of its supercomputer AI Watson in your pocket with an app. And it's not lost on developing nations. You don't have to have and build data centers anymore. All you need is a connection to the internet and a laptop or even a smartphone. There's quite a few stories in Africa of people running and creating whole businesses from a smartphone, because that's all they can get their hands on, but you can do it. because all the compute, all the work is done in the cloud. You don't have to have a lot of power in your pocket. The problem is, of course, at the moment, that only 1/3 of the world is connected to the internet at the moment. It's not a World Wide Web, it's really a Western web, maybe www, Western web, something, but it's definitely not a World Wide Web. There's great potential connecting up the next 2/3 of the world, the developing nations in particular. It's not lost on Google with their Loon project, to float balloons across Africa, for example, or Facebook that want to fly drones across developing nations to create an internet connection. And some people, see the potential for this when you connect up 2/3 of the world, the potential for it to change society. As I was in the conversation earlier, talking about how the web, how the cloud can reshape business, reshape society, even maybe it's technically deterministic, but the potential is there. But of course, everything generally has 2 points of view at least. Depends on where you're looking at it from. In 2008, again, Contemporary History, I don't know if you know this book, but as he trying to come up with this idea, he could see that the forking of the net is contemporaneous with Nick Carr's cloud and the explosion of the cloud. On the one fork, you see greater control. On the other hand, you see greater freedom. I mean, the original internet, was built for greater decentralization than it is now. In 2011, of course, these two sides came together when Schmidt of Google met Assange. And it's been described like the two poles of the internet. Schmidt more interested in expanding and connecting the world to American corporate markets, whereas Assange was far more interested in the original ethos of the internet, in a sense, the decentralized freedom approach. In 2012, Bruce Sterling said, well, we might as well give up, talk about the internet. That's why I used those companies, Apple, Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Microsoft. They're, creating stacks, we call them ecosystems, etc. But yes, creating stacks, 5 computers, sucking, it is big money required to run big infrastructure. Not everybody can get on board. So, maybe there will only be 5 computers in the near future, or certainly 5, big kind of data centers distributed around the world. But anyway, that's why I used those 5 companies at the beginning. And then, of course, this time last year, but one day, I think it was a day ago, a year and a day, when Snowden emerged the findings about the NSA surveillance and the PRISM projects and what many would regard as a dark side of the net. And there's plenty of dark sides to the net and the web and the cloud, but certainly PRISM is one of what regarded as a dark side. And of course, last year, remember, wow, this is really, cloud business, our cloud models are really under threat here. The cloud companies certainly got anxious. And it still goes on. Greenwald just recently published his book. It was Greenwald that helped Snowden out the NSA surveillance and GCHQ surveillance activities. And, just a couple of weeks ago, in that book was the revelation about the NSA installing spyware on hardware, Cisco routers, etc. It just goes on and on. They can't help themselves. It is quite nice to see recently, like Google, having a little poke at the NSA with some, what they call an Easter egg, some comment in the code for their new end-to-end encryption, digging at the NSA with a certain phrase they used when they were intervening in data communications between Google data centers. So yeah, the cloud companies are responding, but I think probably, last year, 2013, was really perhaps a tipping point, a real fork in the IT industry. Berners-Lee certainly was not happy. That was not his original intention for all this surveillance going on. And the public reacted. the young hackers, developers reacted with a slew of ephemeral, no footprint, anonymous communication tools. They just came out as quickly as you can imagine. You know, Snapchat, for example. And networking people started to think about, you know, we can build a different internet. You know, the internet today is quite different the way it was originally intended. So just like in the dictatorships of Egypt, when people meshed their way out of the country when the international links were broken. So, you know, people are talking about new mesh nets to get around government surveillance, specifically for that. Snowden's operating system has been released to, you know, quite a bit of interest. It uses the Tor network to try and, you know, hide your identity. But, you know, that has been broken by NSA anyway, so it doesn't really matter in a sense. Plenty of peer-to-peer, of course. This one I just picked up a couple of weeks ago. I thought I'd pick it up because I've underlined it, you know, Dropbox-type functionality, bypassing the need for a cloud server. People are starting, you know, we're starting to not trust the cloud, bypass it. And so, you know, today the internet is rather different to it was when it was first designed. Back then, you had maybe 5 computers, but you had very few computers. They were big, they weren't mobile. Today, of course, it's very different. You know, instead of 5 computers, you might soon have 5 billion. You know, everybody's carrying them around. They're very mobile. It's almost the flip. It's almost the reverse of it was when the internet was first born. And tomorrow, of course, it's going to be quite different. You know, you've got there's me with Google Glass on, for example. That's me with shorter hair like I have now. Yeah, you can wear your computer and you can embed it. You've got Internet of Things. It's a very different landscape to it was back in the 60s. And the smartphone you've got in your pocket, of course, is more powerful than got us to the moon back in the 60s. It's quite incredible. It's a supercomputer for sure in your pocket. But when you're designing and thinking about the future, you know, you are constrained by the past and the present. I think this cover from Byte magazine kind of illustrates that style of thinking. You know, when they're thinking about wearable computers, I think this was in the 80s, this cover, you know, it was a bit of a joke. It wasn't totally serious, but it illustrates the point that your concepts are constrained by what you use and what you're familiar with. You know, think far enough into the future. You know, in the 60s, would everybody have thought, you know, you're wearing computers, let alone, you know, using laptops? But, you know, there is a very different way of thinking about the future of the cloud. Instead of seeing big data centers and mainframes, essentially, although, you know, cloud data centers are effectively, you know, meshed up and distributed. But instead of seeing big data centers, you could see the network itself. Instead of seeing big data centers, you could see people, peers. Instead of the cloud, you could think of the crowd. And you've got the Internet of Things as well. So when you're thinking about energy distribution, like Rifkin, I'll look at his book later, even that's changing. In Germany, you may have come across the energy transition. At the moment, they're about 23-24% renewable. By 2050, they're aiming to get to about 60% of renewable distributed energy. Well, it's a different model from France, where they are concentrating on nuclear power, whereas in Germany, they're concentrating on a different, you know, maybe longer-term plan. So instead of energy distribution, talk about distributed energy, maybe, you know, instead of computing distribution, you can talk about distributed computing. In our college down the road, as I was talking earlier, we've got 5,000 institutional computers, not including the BYOD that we also include. And yeah, I did a quick back-of-the-envelope calculation on the average sort of compute power of that. It's 100 teraflops sitting there on the desks. You know, most of the time it's not doing anything, you know, while somebody's thinking about what they've got to say, you know. So you may come across grid computing, it's not new, it is a different style of cloud computing, if you like, although it's still very centralized. You know, your machine generally acts as a slave. Our machines, we've got projects that contribute to academic research. medical research in their spare time. I'm quite pleased with that. You know, it's a good use of their spare processing capabilities. But grid computing was not really what I wanted to think about. There was something far more revolutionary going on. There's a lot of people talking about reinventing the internet with the concepts we got today. Peer-to-peer, push everything to the edge rather than the centralized approach. I mean, a lot of people have been talking about how vulnerable the internet is now because you've got a lot of centralization. You know, you've got the root DNS servers, and there's a history of them being attacked and, you know, thwarted, etc. Commotion, for example, is one example of a mesh network that people are starting to build into city centers. I'm not sure if it's Detroit's got one. There's quite a few of them coming up around the place. You notice I've tried to highlight it. They're designed to circumscribe government censorship and surveillance. Again, it's motivated by, you know, Snowden, NSA. But the real revolution, and we've been waiting for it, is a protocol that you can decentralize properly with. And Bitcoin, you know, originally designed for cryptocurrency, is quite an interesting protocol for decentralized decision-making. And the blockchain is a decentralized transaction ledger, or data store, if you like. So yeah, there's a story from a little while ago, and this is all really quite new, certainly in the last, you know, year, and a lot since January. How Bitcoin can turn the cloud inside out, like MadeSafe. This is, again, a story from, was it February 2014? You know, a massive array of internet disks where it would chop up your data and spread it into the crowd. Sounds scary, doesn't it? You know, people at our company, our college, you know, quite scared about giving it to Google. It's not in the college walls, let alone giving it to a kind of anonymous crowd of people. I don't know you, but that's the way these protocols work. It will chop it up, encrypt it, and distribute it. Another story there. BitCloud, I mean, that's making the point there. You know, using the Bitcoin protocol, Bitcoin 2, by the way, to revolutionize the internet, revolutionize the cloud, turn it inside out and put it into the crowd. This young hacker, I think he's 19, he's 20 now, I think. He won a prize recently for his ideas, but Ethereum transformed the web into one giant Bitcoin network. Again, the same idea, using this protocol. And you're probably going to see a lot. I mean, we're at the beginning of something quite interesting. These older hackers here, talking about, again, Bitcoin, decentralize everything on the internet. A story from September, a bit further ago, but this is really, I find, extraordinarily interesting. Decentralized autonomous corporations on the Bitcoin 2 protocol. There was talking, the conversations around this, I was like, forget not being evil. You can't be evil, they say, with this, you know, distributed decision-making capability, where it's scary that the decentralized autonomous corporation running Bitcoin 2 protocols can include people in a distributed, decentralized transaction protocol and things. And there's a kind of phrase that I remember, on the internet or on the web, nobody knows your fridge, you know, because, you know, devices can contribute. I remember I tweeted this presentation this morning, and within 10 seconds I got about 10 retweets of it. I thought, well, they can't be human, can they? They must be robots, you know, picking up the hashtag and retweeting it. And so, yeah, I don't know. If you go on social media, it's really difficult sometimes to see who is robot and who is human. You know, and I think in the future this might get a bit, let's not go there, a bit more difficult. A lot of people are like robots like people, but I won't go down that path. And of course, you know, as we wear our computers, as our environment becomes more immersive, you know, with devices, Internet of Things everywhere, you know, the whole planet is going to become one compute engine. So thanks to Lazaro, who was on before me, who mentioned that one about number 42. But we can all participate in this. So it's possibly, a lot of people have described this period now as like the early 90s. the beginning of the web, just before it started to take off. Or maybe the early noughties, just before cloud, social really took off. Very exciting. Rifkin's picked up on this and talked about its potential for real transformation in society and economies. And probably the really important point is how network effects take hold and change things. Nothing happens for a while and then become exponential. A couple of telephones are no use really, you can only talk to one person. But the more telephones you've got in a network, the more useful it becomes. And if you use swarm protocols like torrent, then the more people in the network, the more things in the network, the more effective it becomes, the more efficient it can become. It's extraordinary. If you have centralized vertical stacks, the bigger the pressure, the more people using it, it's difficult sometimes to accommodate it. But if you decentralize it, go with lateral power instead of vertical power, it's quite extraordinary. So on BitTorrent, the more popular a show is, the quicker it will stream. And I kind of leave you with what you may or may not recognize is ourselves. The human brain is probably one of the best examples of a decentralized distributed network. We don't know what protocol it uses. Maybe it uses Bitcoin too, who knows? But our brains aren't centralized like the network is at the moment. And so, lastly, probably quite relevant is Gibson's quote, when I'm talking about distributed and decentralized computing, the future's here, it's just not evenly distributed. Wait until it gets distributed, maybe. And of course, if some expert says, just this is crazy, it's not going to happen, Arthur C. Clarke's, I think that's his second rule, I can't remember, says, well, it probably could happen. When an expert says it can, it probably will. But when the expert says, paradigm change, the old expert says, yes, it's probably impossible. Yeah, some new guy come up and say, who knows what the future may hold. 30 years from now, we might think, this old model of cloud computing is crazy. We're all on a kind of crowd now, not a cloud. So thank you, that's it. 41 seconds to go. I've never been so
brilliant. Thanks very much indeed.
Okay.
I think that was, before we have the final panel session, I think that was a very good tour d'horizon to open up our thinking. Let me throw you a quick question. The figures last summer showed that for cloud computing, the dominant force was a bookseller called Amazon. Its sales volume by that point was 5 times the combined sales volume of its next 14 competitors, which were the HPs and things like that. So it was the bookseller who took the other ones by the scruff of the necks and showed them the fact that the future was different. Where is that new, do it totally different yet again going to come from, do you think? Is it going to come out of the universities and the colleges because you are freer experiment than the bankings that put down the shutters and say, BYOD and things like that? Or is it going to come from somewhere else?
Well, to be honest, I don't know.
Take a guess.
Amazon, of course, is the standard business model, gravitational effects that, you just get bigger and you're sucking more. Amazon are, of course, and Google, all these cloud companies are still very innovative, aren't they? Amazon,
for a bookseller, remarkably innovative.
Remarkable. You've heard the news, both Google and Amazon are working on droid delivery, aren't they? If you have to deliver objects, but it's 3D printing, which may disrupt that market. You just print it out instead of having it delivered. But Amazon are working on drone helicopters, aren't they, to deliver? But probably, well, all these things, they come out of, they're beyond vision, aren't they? The big disruptor, you just don't see it. Google in the late 90s, their search engine. I remember using, I can't remember what it was now, actually. I still use Yahoo, though. Alta Vista, I remember using Alta Vista. Google search engine, nobody could see where that was going to come. I think that's the big problem. Like the watch, the idea with the watch, we just don't know until it just, like network effects, it just builds. So all of those possible, distributed networks, they may just emerge like a boiling frog. Suddenly, it's happened before we know it amongst ourselves. But it's just starting now. I don't know when there's some really good reason to use it. I'm trying to think of what it's called, but there's a really very interesting streaming service, which is already, well, would stream just about anything you know. I'm trying to, Popcorn. Anybody heard of Popcorn?
Yep.
No, you're all legal guys here, aren't they? But Popcorn's apparently legal. They looked over it and they say, we don't store anything on our servers, therefore we can't be held liable for the content that's streamed across the distributed network. But if you look at Popcorn, you've got it on an app for your mobile phone. You can get just about all of the latest TV shows, all the latest films. That's very attractive to a lot of people. And so they'll install, torrents, distributed clients to get at stuff which is convenient. So from something like that, everybody will be maybe popcorning. So but of course, the establishment tried to break it down, don't they? Like with Napster in the 90s. And still trying to stop this, but Napster was the revolution, in a sense, that we're looking at now. It started to kind of appear, even the cloud, if you like, kind of revolution, because people could see what you could do from the net. But basically, I don't know. It's beyond vision at the moment, I think, where it's going to come from.
From a lot of your students who don't come into college but stay in bed.
Hopefully.
Get on their laptops and their thing. Any questions and observations from the floor? Just a second. There's a microphone coming. Could you announce your identity quickly?
Rob Glickman from SAP. So at SAP, we talk a lot about the networked economy. And is when I think about the future, is the future more, is the cloud the transformation, or is it really networks, the ultimate transformation of cloud?
I think it's networks. I've always been interested in networks from the 70s, really, and the effects that they have. There's always this conflict between, establishment and centralization and gravity, if you like, and freedom and networks. I mean, maybe now, with the Bitcoin 2 protocols, we have an opportunity for something quite different. We'll have to see. Obviously the establishment will try and break it down, but, as a slide earlier, with 3D printing and Internet of Things and networks, there is a real potential for disruptive force. I mean, the model of society, of economics that we have now is not existed from time, past. There is the maker culture, there is the artisan culture, distributed. So you make your stuff, you sell it, and you disintermediate. This is what Rifkin's talking about. You disintermediate a whole layer of middlemen and distribution. Amazon, if I've got a book, I can maybe torrent it. In fact, there's quite a few stories about rock bands and stuff on the new torrent service, where they put their stuff onto the torrent, only on the torrent, and you can download 3D printable parts. I can't remember, there's an Australian band that did that recently. So you could download 3D stuff, and you could download and pay for it as well, and use Bitcoin maybe as well. All disintermediated. So yeah, there is.
You've got software-defined networking, so you've now got software-defined storage and processing and networking. You can do that all together. So more innovations like SAP's HANA, which moved things to do in storage that no one else has thought of doing in storage. So I think the answer is the world is changing, and it is ultimately the broadest sense of networking in its fullest sense. And you heard it first from our ex-representative.
That was an interesting question.
So thanks very much indeed.
All right,
much appreciated.
Okay.
Well done. Excellent.